Welcome back, everyone. Well, the moment you've all been waiting for. I've been getting tweets and emails and comments all over the place about Walter E. Williams, one of the professors of economics in George Mason University. A lot of you have wanted to talk to him. A lot of you wanted to see what he was going to have to say. Guess what? Professor Williams is here right now. Welcome, Professor.
Well, thank you very much.
This is an honor, a true honor. You're one of the icons of the libertarian movement, especially in economics. So I really, truly appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me.
So there's a lot going on, Professor, right now in the economy. And what I guess I want to start off with is I'll start off with today's stock market. We've had one of the worst starts, I think, in history. And I was speaking to somebody the other day, and they mentioned that the stock market sometimes tells us what maybe the economy is going to look like in a few months. Do you agree with that?
Well, that's surely a possibility. That is, people on the stock market, they're betting, and they're people who buy stock bet it's going to go up, and people who sell stock bet the stock prices are going to go down. But I think what we're saying is just a consolidation that's a necessary consolidation because over the last, I guess, maybe 7 years, the Federal Reserve Bank has been creating a lot of money. The QE1, QE2, and giving the impression that our economy was healthier than it was in fact. And so now people are maybe realizing that the economy was not as healthy, and they were misled by the actions of the Federal Reserve. And if you look at it, it's the slowest recovery in a long time. And then on top of that, the administration and other people boast that the unemployment rate is 5%, but nobody even talks about the so-called discouraged worker or people who are not in the labor market. That is, there are 92 million Americans who are not in the labor market. They've dropped out, and they've gone for unemployment compensation and welfare and other handout programs. So it's not really a very, very healthy economy. And the reason why we're doing as we have done in the past, as well as we have, over the last several years, is because other countries are worse off than we are. That is, people in Spain and Portugal and Italy and Germany, they're putting their money in the American market because it happens to be better off than their own markets.
Yeah, it does seem. You actually brought up an interesting point about the unemployment rate. Didn't they also change the criteria over the last few years?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Well, the people, unemployment means people who are willing and able and seeking a work. Now, and so a large number of Americans don't fit in that category, but because they're not willing and able and seeking work because they're discouraged or any number of reasons. They like the handouts of the welfare state, and so all of those Americans do not fit into the unemployment statistics. And some economists said that if you included the workers who were not participating in the labor market in the unemployment statistic, we might be talking about 11% rate of unemployment.
Wow, 11%. Well, that would not be good for the current administration, that's for sure.
Well, and the current administration, to a large extent, they are responsible for it. The dampening characteristics, the labor market dampening characteristics of Obamacare. That is, many firms are just not hiring people because it's more costly because of the Obamacare program. They have very, very costly regulations, which again reduce the incentive for firms to hire employees. And then on top of that, there's a lot of incentive for government-created incentives for firms to locate overseas where there's not as many devastating regulations that we have in the United States.
Yeah, that's a big problem. I know Donald Trump wants to repatriate those earnings right back to our country. Before I get
the way that you repatriate those earnings is, number one, do something about the corporate profit tax. Do something about the financial regulations, that the so-called Dodd-Frank financial regulations. Do something about all these things that make it very, very costly for businesses to operate in the United States.
Let me ask you this question, because I need to get an answer for this because I haven't been able to find it, and I'm sure you probably have it. If we repatriate earnings, we cut the corporate tax rate down to 15, 10%, whatever our next president decides to do, do you think that would generate more CapEx spending? Or is there not enough demand out there for them to get into capital expenditures?
Well, I think that as the cost of capital is just like any other thing. That is, the lower the cost of capital formation, the more that you will see of it. And so these regulations and a tax code raise the cost of capital formation and therefore reduces the productivity of the labor market. That is, what makes a worker productive is the amount of capital that he has working for him. That is, if you see a highway being built by, let's say, a guy's operating huge earth movers, or see a highway being built where a guy is using shovels and wheelbarrows, well, who do you think is getting paid the highest wage? Well, it's the guy operating the earth mover. He's not getting paid the higher wages because contractors like earth mover drivers. He's getting a higher wage because he is more productive, because he has more capital working with him. That is, an earth mover is a piece of capital. And so he has more capital, and so he's more productive. And that's how you increase wages, by making workers more productive. And as I said, you make workers more productive by increasing the amount of capital that they have to work with.
I really don't know how he does it, folks, but a very complex subject, and Professor Williams just breaks it down to the basics. Amazing stuff. Professor Williams, how about aging demographics? How important is that? I hear a lot of people saying, look, the country's getting older, they're not spending as much money anymore. This is going to be kind of hard to increase consumer spending, which is, I think, 70% of our GDP. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that consumer spending is not a huge driver of the economy. That is, for example, if you're spending, let's say you're spending on the money on your vacation. Let's say you have $10,000 and you spend it on vacation or clothes or things like that. It has far less of an input into the economy than if you spend it on machines and investment activities. So the big problem in our country is that the amount of spending and the cost of formulating capital. Now, I guess maybe some people are not spending as much because they fear the downturn in the economy, and that also they may be paying off debt. And I don't have the data or the statistics on it, but there's a number of reasons why Americans would not spend as much.
That's fascinating. And on the same line of thought, I know you wrote, if I remember correctly, you wrote a piece on it, or you did an interview in regards to the minimum wage. So it sounds like intuitively, if you increase the minimum wage, people would have more money to spend. But it doesn't seem like you agree with that.
No, if you increase the minimum wage, those people who keep their jobs will have a higher income. Those people who lose their jobs will have a lower income. And the minimum wage, the effect of the minimum wage is to discriminate against the employment of low-skilled workers. Now, just ask, many people are pushing for a $15 minimum wage by 2020. Matter of fact, that's one of the campaign promises of Bernie Sanders. But just ask yourself the question: suppose there was a worker who could only produce or add $5 worth of value per hour to your output. That's what he can add. Well, would you pay him $20 an hour wage? No.
No way.
But if you could pay him $5 what he was worth in terms of his output, you would hire him. So what the minimum wage law does, it discriminates against the hiring of such a person, let's say a person who could only produce $5 worth of value per hour. And who are those people in our economy? Well, they tend to be young people. The young people lack the experience and maturity and other attributes of adults. And particularly black youngsters, they not only share the handicaps of teenagers in general, but they share the additional handicaps of rotten education and rotten background. They live in poor neighborhoods. And so the minimum wage law discriminates against black teenage unemployment more so than anybody else. And you just look at the unemployment statistics among black teenagers, it's slightly over 50%, and the unemployment rate for white teenagers is around 30%, and the unemployment rate for adults is considerably lower. So what the minimum wage law does, it discriminates against the employment of low-skilled people. But in addition, what some people do not understand at all is that the minimum wage law is one of the most effective tools in the arsenal of racists all over the world. And if you look at my book, I wrote in 1990, it's called South Africa's War Against Capitalism. I spent 3 months in South Africa doing a lot of work on labor markets. And the major supporters of minimum wage laws for blacks were white racist unions in South Africa who would never have a black as a member, and their stated reason for supporting minimum wage is to protect white workers from having to compete with low-skilled, low-wage black workers. As a matter of fact, what they actually said, we want to make the price of the wage so high that an employer will not hire a black person.
Well, that's so counterintuitive almost, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And if you look at our first minimum wage in our own country, it was the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. And if you go to page 6513 of the Congressional Record on March 31st, 1931, and look at the legislative debate among congressmen and senators, you'll read things like, that contractor brings cheap colored labor up from the South and you put them in cabins, and it's labor of that sort that's in competition with white Americans. And you get all kinds of statements where congressmen and senators are supporting the Davis-Bacon Act. Now, we still have the Davis-Bacon Act on the books today. It still has the effect of discriminating in construction against non-union labor, and most blacks in construction are non-union. But the rhetoric in support of the Davis-Bacon Act today is not like it was in 1931.
No, not at all. Well, we got a few minutes left. I know everybody, we want Professor Williams here for another 3 hours. Unfortunately, he can't do it. We can't do it. Professor Williams, are you ready to get in the ring with Donald Trump here for a second?
Okay.
Donald Trump thinks that we can make China buckle in regards to the manipulation of their currency by slapping some tariffs on there. Do you think this is a good idea?
No, it isn't. Imposing tariffs on Chinese goods raise the cost of the goods to the American people who buy those goods. Now, what China is doing, it's hurting its own people through rigging the economic game. It's kind of like let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Suppose you and I are on a rowboat in the middle of the ocean, and I shoot a hole in my end of the boat. What are you going to do? Are you going to say, okay, Williams, I'll get even with you. I'll shoot a hole in my end of the boat. It's stupid. And so that's what Trump is proposing. If China messes their citizen, rips off their citizen, well, we're going to retaliate by ripping off our citizens.
I like that analogy. So in regards to Trump, one more time, I have one more question in regards to Trump. Have you looked at any of the plans from any of the presidential candidates, by the way?
No, I haven't. I have not looked at a single debate, whether it's Republicans or Democrats.
Oh, wow.
And since Obama has been in office, I've only caught 10 minutes of him, and it's 10 minutes because I could not find the remote to change the channel.
So I get the funny feeling if you checked your blood pressure, you'd be really healthy, aren't you? There's got to be a strong 1.0 correlation on that. Professor Williams, the last couple questions here before we take off. What is your opinion that we need to do to get this economy going again?
Well, I think the answer is very simple, and that is get government out of our lives. Now, this is just not a rhetorical statement that I'm talking about. It's the fact that if you look at our history, from today, for example, the federal government is 25% of the GDP.
Wow.
From 1787 until 1930, the federal government was only 3% of the GDP, except during wartime. That is, we became the richest country on the face of this earth because we had small government. And we begin to get in problems as government gets larger and larger. So the solution to our problems, I think, is to reduce the role of government. And it's a moral argument as well, because if you look at the federal budget, 2/3 to 3/4 of the federal budget consists of programs where the Congress is taking the earnings of one American and giving it to some other American to whom they do not belong. I'm talking about handouts to farmers, bailouts for big business, Medicare, Medicaid, all the food stamps, et cetera, all these programs are represent Congress taking the earnings of one person and giving it to another to whom it does not belong. And and I think that we have to recognize when God gave Moses the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," He did not mean "Thou shalt not steal" unless you got a majority vote in Congress. And that's what most Americans think, that it is okay for the government to forcibly use one American to serve the purposes of another. And I think that's immoral.
That's a good point. I know it's one of your famous quotes as well. You call that a weird sense of social justice, I think you mentioned, or something like that before?
Well, no, it's legalized theft.
Legalized theft.
If I see an elderly lady sleeping out on the grate in downtown Washington, she's cold, she's hungry, she needs some medical attention, and I walk up to you and I say, "Give me your $200." Then, having gotten your $200, I go downtown and help the lady out, buy her some medical attention, some food, and shelter. Would you find me guilty of a crime? Yes, you would find me guilty of theft, because what is theft? Theft is taking what belongs to one American and giving it to another to whom it does not belong. Now, most Americans can agree with me, but the problem is that, well, when the agents of Congress, namely the IRS, when they come up to you and say, "Well, give me your $200," and then take it downtown to help the lady out, well, it's the same thing. It's taking your money and giving it to somebody who it does not belong to. But it's just a matter of legality. But that's legalized theft. The first act, where I walked up to you, that is illegal theft. The second act is legal theft. I mean, it's just a matter of legality. And many Americans believe that, well, gee, that's okay. I mean, Americans who are conservative and liberal, they believe that that's okay.
Yeah. And that's one big problem right now in our country. That's absolutely right. Professor Walter.
That's driving the deficits and our spending and our national debt and many other problems.
Yeah, that's just one of many other problems. Professor Walter E. Williams. Professor, where do we go to learn more about you and what you're writing?
Well, you can go to my website. It's walterewilliams.com, and it has many of my publications and many videos that I've done. As a matter of fact, there's one video is called "Suffer No Fools," and it's a video that's based on my autobiography, Up From the Projects. And then there's a 3-hour interview on C-SPAN, let's say, that I did in November.
Fabulous interview. Yeah, that was a great interview. I think, I don't know how you did that one. That was a long time.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So there's a lot of good material on my website.
Absolutely, everyone. And I also recommend WalterEWilliams.com. I also recommend his latest publication, American Contempt for Liberty. Fabulous read. You have a lot of great articles. Thank you so much again, Professor Williams, for being here.
And thank you for inviting me, and have a good day.
You too. Thank you very much. Professor Walter E. Williams, everybody. Go to WalterEWilliams.com. We'll be right back after these brief messages to find out, can anyone become evil?